Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 build guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to be covering the ultimate main character for Baldur's Gate, the Bardadin or Bard Paladin multiclass. Paladins are the most popular class according to Larian stats, and Bards the second most, and of course the charismatic sword-wielding leader is so archetypal for this game that I think this class, if you were to sort of put together a canonical TAV for Baldur's Gate, this multiclass would pretty much be it. I'm using Minthara as the example character here because I think it also fits her lore very well, and for another lore-friendly option, you could go with Wyll or even Astarion for this build. I think there's a lot of characters that kind of fit this archetype of the charismatic, dashing swordsman in amongst the companions, and all of whom will fit this build very well. This, of course, is also an extremely powerful build, extraordinarily damaging and very powerful for honor mode, gives you access to excellent dialogue skills, so will be really good if you want your TAV to be able to pass dialogue checks, and is just an extremely powerful build overall. Alright, let's just jump right in and start building the Bardadin. So, first off, we have to take a look at our character stats. These are going to need to change significantly because one of the things that makes this character combo so good is that, just like all of the other charisma-based classes in Baldur's Gate, Paladin, Warlock, Sorcerer, and Bard, you can mix and match these two classes in just about any combination and have them synergize well together. Paladins, by default, suffer from what's called multi-attribute dependency, or MAD. That means that they want lots and lots of different attributes to be high in order to be effective. But mixing Paladin with Bard lets us focus on fewer attributes so that we don't need to spend as many points and can become a little more single attribute dependent, or SAD. It's like I always say, it's bad to be mad, and it's rad to be sad. Right here, you will want to look at... The reason that we get to do this is because we are playing a Bard, we can play a dexterity-based Paladin. Paladins normally are going to want to have high strength because they'll often be two-handed weapon users or be using heavy weapons. But the ability to drop strength to 8 on this character gives us a lot of free points to play with when we are increasing dexterity. Normally, Paladins want strength for damage, dexterity for initiative, constitution for hit points, wisdom for saving throws, and charisma because all of their spells and their saving throws and class abilities are all based on that. The Bard version gets to cut out one of those attributes and regain some of those points, requiring fewer points spent, so we can change our attribute spread to something a little cleaner that doesn't require so much investment into a stat that's mostly not going to have high impact for us. We're going to go ahead and take 16 Constitution and 16 Dexterity, so you'll be using a finesse weapon to apply your Dexterity to your melee attacks, and 16 Constitution is very important because you'll almost always be concentrating on a spell with this character. You don't want to lose concentration on your spells, especially in the late game. There's some important spells that you really don't want to lose concentration on, and you're going to be relatively low hit point for a melee character because you're taking a lot of levels in Bard, which has a lower hit point total per level, so having high constitution is critically important for this character. We then take 14 charisma, and you can take 12 wisdom to maximize your saving throws. You could also put some of these points in strength if you want a little more jump distance or carry weight, stuff like that. This character also does benefit very strongly from the from elixirs of strength, just because you're a melee character that gets athletics proficiency, and having an elixir of strength on your character gives you the additional option to push enemies. Of course, you can also still make strength-based attacks if you drink an elixir, but you don't need to because we're going to be building primarily for dexterity. For our subclass, you are going to want to take, in my opinion, the best of these when you're only taking a couple levels of Paladin is Oath of the Ancients. This lets this character double up as actually a pretty good support character in the early game. A bonus action heal is extremely powerful, and this is 2 bonus action heals for only 1 channel Oath charge, because you get it 1 turn and then you get it the next turn. Super powerful for bringing downed enemies back to life, or downed allies back up. Incredibly strong just to give yourselves a little more buffer in combat. Just a really good ability at 1 point. You also get these tenets, which you're going to need to follow, because you don't want to break your oath on this version of the character. Although you could potentially do a multi-class with Oathbreaker. That's not what we're going for here, though. The other thing that you get from Paladin is Lay on Hands, which is pretty useful because it gives you another support option for healing. Also lets you remove Astarion's Bloodless debuff for a very cheap resource cost. That's something that people don't always know about this ability. It removes diseases, and that counts as a disease, so you can remove that for basically for free. And don't forget Divine Sense. It's easy to forget this, but this game has a lot of combats against fiends and undead, and advantage for 2 turns against them at the cost of only a bonus action is extremely powerful, especially for paladins who really don't want to miss their attacks. We then take a second level in Paladin, getting access to Smites, which is what we're really in Paladin for, as well as a fighting style. We also get to take a bunch of spells, which is pretty nice here as well, so let's talk about our fighting style first. We're going to want to take either defense or protection here, depending on whether you intend to be a sword and board user or a 2-weapon user. This character actually gets to choose between those two, and I'll talk about which one you would rather be when we get to the sword bard levels, but if you are a sword and board user, protection fighting style is pretty good for this character because you usually won't want to be the only melee character in your party with this character, since you are not like a main tank because of your relatively low hit points. This will allow you to stand adjacent to your other melee allies or adjacent to your ranged allies. You can play sort of a hit-and-run style, where you run in, kill an enemy with your extremely high damage, and then run back to hang out with your ranged allies, providing them protection with your shield. Defense is going to be sort of the default best strategy, but this character also does not get a lot of uses for its reaction, and it's important in character builds to have uses for all of your combat resources, your action, bonus action, reaction, concentration, and movement. And so adding protection gives you a good use for your reaction, which this character otherwise doesn't really have. I'm going to take defense here just as sort of the default best choice, but I want to mention both of them as being very good picks. We are going to then pick up a bunch of spells, and of course you're going to want to have access to Bless. Every character that can take Bless should have access to it. This is going to be your default concentration in the early game. Very strong to have. One thing to keep in mind is that because we only have 14 charisma, our saving throws will not be incredible, so you want to avoid spells that have saving throws associated with them. Divine Favor costs concentration, but gives you quite a lot of extra damage in the early game, especially if you are wielding 2 weapons. Your offhand weapon will also get the additional radiant damage, and because we are using finesse weapons, you can use 2 light weapons and get the offhand attack for some additional damage here. I'm going to suggest Thunderous Smite as well, which does not require your concentration, so you can use it while concentrating on Bless, unlike Searing Smite. And knocking an enemy prone and pushing them is an incredibly powerful effect, so you definitely want access to Thunderous Smite. For the 4th spell, there's a couple options. You could take something like Shield of Faith. While your concentration saves are not going to be incredible, because we don't get con save proficiency, this is 2 AC until you lose concentration on it, and lasts all day, which is pretty nice. You could also take Protection from Evil and Good. There's definitely some fights where this is very, very important. Overall, you're going to want to prepare your spells. Remember, you can always change your prepared spells when you're not in combat. You're going to want to prepare your last spell based on the situation, but a reasonable default is just to have Shield of Faith. You aren't going to need Cure Wounds because you have Lay on Hands, so you already have an action for healing if you desperately need one, and as an Ancient's Paladin, you get the Healing Aura, which gives you a bonus action heal, which is much, much more useful than an action heal. You also get these Divine Smites, which lets you spend your spell slots on Smites. You will mostly be using these level 1 spell slots for Smite attacks rather than casting these spells, but it's nice to have the options to when you need these spells, when you need a particular spell. Having gotten access to our Smites, we are immediately going to take a dip over into Bard and continue with Bard for the rest of the character. We For our cantrip selection, again, you're going to want to steer clear of things that have a saving throw associated with them, but as a melee character with okay, if not incredible, hit points, Blade Ward can be very powerful for you. Paladins do also benefit quite strongly from advantage, so you could take True Strike. As a melee character, you won't always be able to hide, so you could use this to gain advantage on your first attack. That being said, True Strike is pretty bad overall, so we're going to take Minor Illusion. I don't want to trick people, you know I joke about True Strike a lot. I don't want to trick people into using it, because on some characters it actually looks pretty reasonable. But it's still just a bad use of an action, so we're going to take Minor Illusion here as the most powerful option. Now we get another bonus action heal from Healing Word, which is another incredible way for this character to support your allies. You also get Long Strider, which is a ritual, so it does not cost a spell slot, meaning you can still spend that, which it's irritating that that's not in the description, but that is true. You can have Long Strider prepared, gain 10 feet of movement speed on your entire party for the entire day, and then still spend that spell slot on a smite attack or on another spell. So that's super powerful. I personally like to have Speak with Animals available because there's so many cool conversations with animals, and for a main character who has decent charisma skills and decent and a reasonable value of charisma, Speak with Animals makes a lot of sense to me. And then for our last spell, you're going to want something relatively situational. Remember, you're pretty much always going to be spending these spell slots on smites, so you don't necessarily need to have spells that are good all the time. You want spells that are good, that when you want them, you really want them. So you could take something like Disguise Self, which is useful if you're trying to speak with dead, something like that. Another ritual spell that doesn't cost a spell slot, or Featherfall just in case. Any of those could be reasonable options. Also get to add some more skills in here. And one thing I should have mentioned as well is that this character does very well just in general as a conversationalist, so you can take your conversation skills and we will be able to increase those as we level up. Bard level 2, we get Song of Rest, which is pretty good for any party to have access to. This is a very powerful supporting ability. It gives you a third short rest in the day. So not only does this recharge all of your character's spells, it also basically is a huge heal for your entire party an additional time per day, as long as you're not in combat, which is extremely valuable and can prevent you from having to spend too much time long resting in order to heal. You also get Jack of all trades, giving you reasonable skill proficiencies in just about everything, especially the dexterity-based skills, because you don't get access to most of the dexterity-based skills, but you can still pick locks with this character because of Jack of all trades. You have half your proficiency bonus, plus you'll be a full dex build, so you're going to end up with a reasonable sleight of hand score, a reasonable stealth score because of Jack of all trades. You still won't be making knowledge checks with your intelligence at 8, but the addition of Jack of all trades to your dexterity scores actually gives this character another set of another dimension to its play in terms of making stealth checks or making sleight of hand checks. For our spell here, it really, at this point, I don't think matters. We're, again, focusing on things that don't have saving throws, so you could take Charm Person, or, sorry, not Charm Person, you could take Featherfall or Heroism, whichever ones you are looking to take that you haven't taken already. To be honest, by the time you get down to the 5th level 1 Bard spell, you're just never going to be casting this spell, and we'll probably be replacing it with higher level spells later on, so it doesn't matter. Take whatever you think is going to be fun to play with. Bard level 3, we get to take our subclass, and of course, you know what subclass we're going to take on a melee character. It's going to be the College of Swords. College of Swords Bard gets access to these slashing flourishes, or gets access to these flourishes, which let you spend an inspiration die, which currently you get back on long rest, but later you'll get back on short rest, and then you have Song of Rest to get those back more frequently, to add your inspiration die to the damage of an attack, and to have an effect. Slashing Flourish lets you attack 2 enemies at once, like a cleaving attack. Defensive Flourish gives you 4 armor class, which on this build is actually quite valuable because you'll be in melee and have quite good armor class by default, so you can make yourself extremely hard to hit with Defensive Flourish, and then Mobile Flourish lets you push a target and then teleport to them, also quite useful for repositioning enemies. The melee version of this build, unlike the ranged sword bards, is actually going to use all 3 of the flourishes. Ranged sword bards just spam Slashing Flourish, because the ranged one is coded to allow you to attack the same enemy twice, which is definitely a bug or an odd decision by Larian. It certainly should not work that way, but it does. Whereas the melee version won't let you double up on attacking the same enemy, and is much more in line with sort of the level of power that a character should have. Ranged sword bards are broken, and of course you can see that in my build, the Bardic Machine Gun, if you're interested in more about that. But Slashing Flourish also interacts very interestingly with smite attacks, the melee version of Slashing Flourish, because you can hit 2 enemies, and if you have your smite set to a reaction, you can smite both of those enemies. This is going to allow you to cast 2 smites or 3 smites if you have an offhand attack in your opening round of combat against 2 enemies. Paladins usually suffer against multiple enemies because they're so single target damage focused, but the melee Slashing Flourish of the Sword Bard really lets us get around that by attacking multiple enemies at once. For our fighting style, we really have a choice, and this is why we took defensive style earlier. We can either take dueling if you want a sword and shield, or 2-weapon fighting if you want to use a main attack and an offhand attack. Once we get access to our second attack, we are going to have to extra attack at Bard level 6. We're going to have so much damage on this character that, in my opinion, you don't need the 2-weapon fighting for the additional offhand attack. And this character makes one of the best sword and board characters in the game, sword and shield character. And so I would recommend dueling, which lets you add 2 damage to all of those. This will be multiplied, of course, every time you like Slashing Flourish or whatever and hit multiple enemies. But both builds are very viable. If you want more damage, go 2-weapon fighting. If you want more tankiness and a little more team utility, go dueling. For this build, I'm going to recommend dueling, but both builds work very well, whether you're doing 2-weapon fighting with an offhand weapon or dueling with a shield in your offhand. For our level 2 spell here, there's a few options that are really good. Invisibility is great. Cloud of Daggers does not have a saving throw associated with it, and so it's just 100% reliable damage, and really nice for every character to have, especially a character with somewhat weak ranged options like this character. Although remember, you're a dexterity-based build, and now we have ranged Slashing Flourish, so you can just attack twice using a bow, and it will be just as good as your melee attacks. You won't be able to use smites on them, but as a default action in combat, your ranged attacks with a good bow are actually going to be better overall than your melee attacks, because you're going to be able to use a heavy crossbow or the Titan string bow with an elixir of strength to actually do more damage with your ranged attacks than your melee attacks. You can also double up attacking the same enemy with ranged Slashing Flourish. This character gets to operate both at range and in melee extremely well. Your main damage, of course, is going to come from smite attacks in the late game, so you're going to do more often melee, but don't forget that you have really powerful ranged options on this character. That being said, I still think you're going to want to take something like Cloud of Daggers, and then we'll replace, say, Featherfall with Invisibility here just for the utility. Though there's a lot of really good options. Again, just focus on things that don't have saving throws associated with them. So you're going to want utility spells rather than ones with saves. At Bard level 6, we get a feat and get to increase our dexterity up to 18 here. There is an option to take Dual Wielder if you are going for the 2-handed weapon build. So you get 1 AC, which is the same as you get from boosting your dexterity by 2. You do lose a little bit of hit chance, but you also get access to higher level to non-light weapons, dual wielding. So it doesn't actually cost you that much to replace the ASI for dexterity with dual wielder if you're dual wielding. That said, I really like hit chance on this build. It's so painful to miss when you need to land an important smite, so I would recommend going for dexterity even over dual wielder, but I just wanted to mention that as a viable and powerful option in itself. For our cantrip here, now I'm going to take True Strike to for the haters, and then we're going to take something like Knock for utility. Again, you're going to be spending your spell slots primarily on smites, so something that doesn't have a save and has utility in situational combats can be very useful. See invisibility, for example. Silence is very good against certain enemies. Knock, of course, gives you out-of-combat utility. For the best combat power, we're going to take Silence here, but there's a lot of different options. And these are all spells you won't be casting that often, because you have smites. At level 5 Bard, you get Font of Inspiration, so now we get our Slashing Flourishes, or our Flourishes, back on short rests rather than long rests, letting us spend those pretty profligately, which is really nice. You can do a lot of burst damage against multiple enemies. You can pretty much always Slashing Flourish. If you're worried about getting hit, you can always Defensive Flourish. And the bonus is increased to a D8, which basically means a Flourish is like a +1 level of a smite attack, because every spell level you spend on a smite increases the smite damage by a d8. So you're effectively always smiting at +1 level when you're using a flourish here. For our spell selection, again, we're looking for things that have utility in some situations. It's like situational spells that don't have saving throws. The premier example of this is Plant Growth. There are some encounters that this will just completely ruin. It doesn't take concentration, makes a huge AoE that slows your enemies a lot, and your level 3 spells are, again, mostly going to be spent on smite attacks. Bard level 6, we get extra attack from leveling up in Sword Bard. I don't need to talk about why this is so powerful, but, you know, it's extremely powerful. On Tactician or below, this character also becomes one of the best recipients for haste, because you can... Well, on every level, this character is one of the best recipients for haste, but on Tactician or below, with extra attack, you can make 4 attacks, and in a fight where you really, really want to kill something, those 4 attacks can all be smites in the opening round of combat, which can give you burst damage starting at level 8 with a haste or a speed potion of... if you spend 2 level 3 spell slots and 2 level 2 spell slots for just about 200 damage in the opening round of combat on average. Ludicrously powerful effect that gives you incredible burst damage. Still true on Honor Mode, though on Honor Mode the haste action will not allow you to use the second attack from extra attack, but it's still a very good spell for this character, especially because it increases your AC, and this character will be a very high AC build that will rarely take hits as a result. For our second spell here, the level 3 spells almost all have saving throws associated with them, so there's really not much that you particularly want from level 3. We could go back for a utility spell like Enhance Ability, something like that, or Detect Thoughts for conversations. Any of those are fine, though, again, you will be spending your spell slots primarily on smites. Bard level 7, you are going to want to pick up one of my favorite spells, and one that I think is actually extremely underrated in this game, is Freedom of Movement. It lasts until long rest, it does not take your concentration, and you cannot be paralyzed or restrained, and you move through difficult terrain. Well, we can create difficult terrain with our plant growth, so if you have freedom of movement on yourself, that gives you perfect movement through your own plant growth or any difficult terrain that's on the battlefield or an effect from an ally. It also prevents you from being paralyzed. Obviously, we're fighting Mind Flayers, who paralyze pretty frequently, or restrained, and if you don't precast it, then you can snap an ally out of stun, which obviously is one of the most dangerous effects in the game, and one that the most dangerous enemies in the game apply very frequently. So I quite like having freedom of movement. Greater invisibility, along with this build's decent stealth checks and very good ranged attacks, can actually be quite useful. You can often get some attacks from outside of combat with greater invisibility before the enemy notices you, because you do have just very powerful ranged options on this character. Dimension Door, I probably wouldn't take, although having a teleport is pretty good, but we're going to go with freedom of movement and probably replace one of the more situational lower level spells with greater invisibility at this point, something like enhanceability. And you'll, again, most of the time you're going to spend your level 4 spell slots on smites, but when you want these spells, they're really, really nice to have. Level 8 Bard, we get to max out our dexterity, meaning that we are going to be hitting very frequently for very high damage with our finesse weapons. And we get to take another spell here. We can go back for whatever utility spell we didn't pick up earlier. Let's take, I don't know, Lesser Restoration. Although you don't really need that on a Paladin because, actually, you really shouldn't take Lesser Restoration because you have Lay on Hands, and that more or less duplicates the effect. Bard level 9, we get access to 5th level spells and 5th level spell slots. So one thing to know about Paladins is that a 5th level spell slot is the same as a 4th level spell slot for smites. Smite attacks can only go up to 5d8, which you get at 4th level spells. So you're going to want to use your 5th level spell slots if you can on a spell, because you're going to have more utility out of that, though there's certainly no shame in just using it for a smite attack. Something like and of course the one thing about bards is that they get pretty bad 5th level spell options, at least in the bard levels. The only good ones require saving throws, and even then Hold Monster and Dominate Person are both duplicated pretty well by lower level effects. So I would here take something like Mass Cure Wounds. Maybe it'll come up, but most of the time, again, you're going to use this for a smite attack, at least at this level. But next level, things get pretty interesting, because you get access to magical secrets, and we can now take a 5th level spell, which we can use on something else. Now, there's one in particular that is incredible and also very, very cool that this character gets to use that other characters do not, and that is Banishing Smite. This is a ranged attack, but we've got 20 dexterity, so we can just banish enemies, and it does plus 5d10 force damage, which is incredibly powerful. That's a huge damage boost to our already quite reasonable ranged attacks, and they can be, if they have 50 points or less, 50 hit points or less, they get banished, removed from combat for 2 turns. This is a Paladin-only spell that Paladins don't get in this game because they never reach 5th level spell casting in Baldur's Gate. So the only way to get access to this spell is to be a bard, a 10th level bard with magical secrets. For that reason, in part because it's cool, and also because it's just very good, we're going to be taking Banishing Smite. And for our second spell slot, there's a lot of good options here. The magical secrets are super powerful, and there's lots of great stuff. You can take other spells that are very hard to get access to, like Hunger of Hadar is unique to certain characters. Not Guardian of Faith. Crusader's Mantle, normally only Paladins can get, and this gives you extra damage to your whole party. Not amazing, but okay. Warden of Vitality gives you a bonus action heal, but we already get a bonus action heal aura, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think your options here are going to be something like Conjure Elemental, which just gives you a summon that lasts all day, and it's always going to be good, whereas Banishing Smite is maybe a little more situational. Haste, which is just the best spell in the game, even on Honor Mode, and very, very powerful for every character. You can concentrate on it on yourself or cast it on an ally. Granted, this character is less likely to want to self-cast Haste because your concentration saves are not amazing, and getting stunned is quite painful for you, but it's always worth considering. Counterspell, which every party should have access to, although since you only reach this at level 12, hopefully you have had Counterspell on another party member for much longer than this, but more Counterspells is always more good. And then a few other really cool options like Wall of Stone can be useful for certain encounters. There's so many cool things that you can do with the magical secrets that you should really base this on what your party needs and what you feel like you want. Another fun one is Spirit Guardians that you can self-cast. We're going to be in melee a lot, so having Spirit Guardians on lets you do a lot of damage just by walking around. This character also makes multiple attacks frequently, so even the humble Hex from a level 1 spell slot can be very good. I could go on and on and on, and I already have, so we'll move on from the magical secrets and take, let's say, Counterspell as a reasonable default, but definitely take the time to explore that list. We take kind of whatever from our Bard spells, going from the very cool magical secrets back to the somewhat disappointing level 5 Bard spells always stings, but we'll just take a utility spell here. And then for our last cantrip, we're going to take, let's say, Mage Hand. You also get to have additional skills, so we can... we get expertise in skills, so we can expertise some of our skills that we have proficiency in. Why is it not letting us expertise the persuasion skill? That's buggy, because we do have persuasion proficiency. I think it's only looking at the skills we... Yeah, it's not letting us put expertise in skills we got from our background, so that's kind of funny. Weird bug here, but we can take, like, athletics. Even with low strength, expertise athletics is still pretty useful. Expertise dialogue skills, expertise perception. Hopefully they fix that bug. There have been some bugs with the skill selection in this game lately that I really hope they resolve soon. A couple other things. For gear for this character, you are going to want a good ranged weapon, because like we talked about, ranged weapons are very powerful. And you have heavy armor proficiency, but we're also a 20 dexterity character, so often on this character it's going to be better to use one of the medium armors that gives you your full dexterity bonus. So you can see by equipping the Yuan-Ti Scale Mail, we go up to AC compared to having a full plate equipped. So you're going to want to decide which of the armors you're going to use on a case-by-case basis, depending on whether you have better heavy armor or better medium armor at that point in time. If you are a sword and board build, you're going to want a finesse weapon in the main hand and a shield, the best shield you can find in the offhand. This Shield of Devotion or other shields that give you a shield like this that gives you an additional spell slot, well, one more spell slot is one more smite, so that's always nice. And remember, you also get 6th level spells, because at level 2 Paladin, you get a 6th level slot, because at level 2 Paladin, you count as a level 1 spellcaster, and then you have 10 levels of Bard, so you still reach 6th level spell slots in the game. You also, if you're a two-handed weapon build, you're just going to want another light and finesse weapon in your offhand. Anything that allows you to guarantee a critical hit, like this Killer's Sweetheart, multiplies extremely well with the very, very high damage of your smite attacks. Something that's also very important on this character is that you go into your character sheet, go to your spellbook, go to your reactions, and set all of your smites to on and ask. This way, when you use a slashing flourish and hit an enemy, so we're going to just set all of these, when you attack an enemy, it will then pop up the question, do you want to use a smite? See, we can now choose what level of smite we want to use. And so this lets you decide whether to smite based on sort of, you already get to see the damage that your default attack did, so you can choose the level of smite based on what you think you need. And it also lets you, if you have it on reaction, when you use a flourish attack, you can still smite. If you don't have it on reaction, the game will not let you both smite and flourish on the same attack. But if you set your smites to to be a reaction and ask you to use them, then it will allow you to choose to smite on a flourish attack. Very, very important for this character, so you absolutely have to do that. It will be a little annoying that it's going to pop that message up every time, but I personally prefer that just because you can then actually make the decision based on what you need in that combat. If you're playing Minthara specifically, then or any other character with Illithid powers, the Luck of the Far Realms Illithid power is incredibly synergistic with Paladin because any critical hit doubles the damage of your smites, and when your smites are doing plus 5d8 damage, that goes up to plus 10d8 damage, doing massive damage. So guaranteed criticals are extremely powerful for this character as well. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the Sword-Adin, the Sword Bard Paladin, and as always, if you have enjoyed this video, do please feel free to leave a thumbs up, comment on the video. I do read all of your comments, although the channel has grown enough that I can no longer reply to every single comment. I read them and I really appreciate them, so thank you so much for taking the time to comment. Both of those things help a ton with the algorithm. I can't overstate how much it helps to have engagement on these videos. It's one of the primary things YouTube looks at when it decides whether to recommend a video, so I really appreciate you taking the time. And if you just want to support any content creator, not just me, that's the best way to do it, is take 10 seconds just to leave any comment on their video. And of course you can subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers my friends, GG.